The mansion stood like a palace at the edge of the city, its marble pillars gleaming under the afternoon sun, the gardens trimmed to perfection, and fountains dancing like liquid diamonds. But inside, a silence heavier than gold haunted its halls because a boy who should have been laughing and playing had not spoken a single word in all his 7 years of life, and his father, a man of immense wealth and power known to the world as Alexander Grant, the billionaire tycoon who could bend industries with a single decision, was powerless in front of his son's silence, his fortune useless against the one thing he longed for most. A child's voice saying, "Father," just once, just enough to prove that love could not be bought, and it was in this desperation that one evening, standing on the grand staircase as dozens of his guests looked on during a lavish charity gala, Alexander raised his glass of champagne, his eyes glimmering with the kind of boldness only despair could give, and he made a shocking declaration that froze the air in the ballroom. "Whoever can make my son speak, will marry me," he said, his voice echoing like thunder across the marble walls, and the audience gasped, whispers rippling like fire, women clutching pearls, men shaking heads, reporters scribbling furiously because this was no ordinary wager. This was the heart of a lonely man who had everything except the sound of his own child's laughter, and as the guests processed his words, the little boy, dressed in a tiny tuxedo, stood near his father with wide brown eyes, clutching a toy car in silence, while Alexander's jaw tightened with both pride and sorrow, for he knew he had just offered his hand not as a businessman but as a desperate father, a man whose empire meant nothing compared to the broken silence of his son. The maid stood frozen at the threshold of the grand dining hall, her uniform slightly wrinkled from the long hours of work, her hands clutching a tray that rattled from nerves, but her eyes, those soft, determined eyes, held something none of the wealthy guests had, a quiet fire born of struggle and compassion, and though she had come from nothing, a childhood of poverty and hardship, she had learned that love spoke louder than money ever could, and it was this love that seemed to draw the little boy toward her as if some invisible thread connected their hearts, for while the other women in their sparkling gowns tried games, toys, candies, and even hired magicians to coax a word from him, the child shrank further into his shell, his small shoulders trembling with fear. But when the maid bent down, setting aside her tray, ignoring the shocked murmurs of the high society crowd, and whispered gently, "It's all right. You don't have to be afraid," something shifted in the boy's eyes, as though for the first time someone was not demanding he perform, not dangling rewards or promising wealth, but simply offering warmth, and though his lips remained closed, his tiny fingers reached out and touched hers, sending a hush across the room, and Alexander, watching from across the table, felt his heart pound in a way it hadn't in years, because he knew instinctively that this ordinary maid carried something extraordinary, something even his billions could not buy.